The thing is we're all connected. Upstream, downstream, it doesn't really matter. We are connected to the Yellowstone, to every river.
Every spring, it's not spring until you see the bluebirds, hear the robins, and hear the sandhill cranes. It helps connect you to the land.
The fish, the wildlife, the clean and cold water, the setting, it all adds up to just this unparalleled experience.
This river is the culmination of water streaming down from various mountain ranges, prairie expanses, and flowing to and from communities small and large. It supports life for countless species. This river has many names, given by the people who have closely interacted with it. Named the Elk River by multiple native tribes, as it was a major migration corridor for elk moving from the summer range in current Yellowstone National Park to winter range on the prairies. The Hidatsa's name for it translates to Yellow Rock River, likely attributed to the yellow cliffs and rocks found along certain stretches. The French fur trappers of the 18th century also used a similar name, Yellowstone, which was passed along to early European American settlers. Now, commonly known as the Yellowstone River, it is the largest undammed river in the United States outside of Alaska. The Yellowstone River is the headwaters to much of the country's waterways. It begins in Wyoming, flows through Montana, then into North Dakota, where its waters continue on through the Missouri River and eventually the Mississippi River and to the ocean.
When I look at Yellowstone Lake, I'm looking at the whole country. I'm looking at the watershed coming down. I'm thinking, oh, this is wonderful. It's pulsing water to our country and feeding and keeping people nourished.
The Yellowstone River originates in the mountains of northwest Wyoming, passes through Yellowstone National Park and into Montana, then flows through a valley that today is more commonly referred to as Paradise Valley. This stretch within the Upper Yellowstone River, from the present-day community of Gardner downstream to the town of Livingston, will be the focal point of this story. Paradise Valley is defined on each side by the Gallatin and Absaroka mountain ranges. This valley's geography was shaped by mountain building events of continental movement 40 to 80 million years ago, followed by volcanic activity and by the growth, movement, and receding of glaciers. The river here journeys through sagebrush slopes and canyon walls before entering the valley's wider expanse, where cottonwood galleries shade its banks. People of various indigenous tribes have interacted with and stewarded all elements of this valley's landscape at varying periods of time over the last 13,000 years, and they still do today. For them, the valley has long been hunting and ceremonial grounds, a travel corridor, and a place considered home. The name of the mountain range that defines the east side of this valley comes from the Hidatsa name for the Crow tribe, Absaroka, meaning children of the large-beaked bird. In the late 1700s, French fur traders and trappers made their way into this region. In 1851, the Laramie Treaty defined this valley and the Yellowstone River as the western boundary of the reduced territory and reservation of the Crow tribe. During this time, the promise of gold and grasslands for cattle ranching brought European Americans to also inhabit this valley, with a heightened influx after 1865, with the end of the Civil War. In the decade to follow, the Crow Reservation was further reduced and the boundary line was pushed further east to no longer include this valley. In 1872, Yellowstone National Park was established just to the south of this valley, and this area became an early site for American recreation, tourism, and commercial hunting. A small train line linked the railroad town of Livingston to the community of Gardiner, bringing folks from around the world to visit the region. Throughout the 1900s, the communities of this valley continued to establish primarily around the economies of cattle ranching, mining, recreation, timber, and Livingston's status as a railroad hub along the Northern Pacific Railway. Today, though the train line down Paradise Valley has been replaced by Highway 89, the natural beauty still brings people here from near and far, not only for the national park, but for this valley, the mountains, and the Yellowstone River. This river binds the communities here, which from Pine Creek to Gardiner are all unincorporated. Most of the folks who live here have their lives and livelihoods intertwined with this landscape, and therefore this river, when the elements are both heavenly and harsh. There are endless examples of folks here showing their connection and respect for this place through hard work, local engagement, and looking out for the well-being of the landscape and their neighbors. The local economy here today is still led by recreation, tourism, and agriculture, all of which depend on the health of this river. This river and Paradise Valley are part of what is considered the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, which is one of the largest, nearly intact temperate zone ecosystems on Earth, allowing it to hold the highest concentration of wildlife in the lower 48 states. Those who know this landscape well know it's possible to appreciate and respect everything's value within the ecosystem while simultaneously experiencing realistic challenges of a shared landscape. Just as they did millions of years ago with volcanic activity, constant shifts continue to take place here, environmentally and socially. In recent decades, the neighboring town of Bozeman, which sits just over the pass west of Paradise Valley, has gone from an agricultural and university town to a city with one of the country's fastest growth rates and housing costs that far outweigh its residents' average incomes. Echoes of these trends are seen in the town of Livingston at the north boundary of Paradise Valley. Paradise Valley itself is seeing rapid increases in recreation numbers and shifts from small family-owned ranches and working-class residents to subdivided land and a wealthier demographic, who are often only seasonal residents. There are many social complexities in this valley, including a broad spectrum of values, incomes, conservation goals, and livelihoods. And some say an underlying threat of local voices being overshadowed by outsiders' focus on the greater Yellowstone ecosystem or on the nearby national park or neighboring cities. Climate change is evident in every season. In the last few years alone, the valley has experienced record heat, ongoing drought, a historic flooding event, and noticeable impacts on a range of species. In the face of these complexities and increasing pressures, how do we meaningfully listen and learn from that which moves within this landscape? The river, the wildlife, the people who are intimately connected to this place. And how do responses to these pressures interconnect in ways that reflect the complexity of this place? How do we respect individual perspectives while improving collective well-being? And how does this provide all of us, no matter where in the world we call home, guidance on how we connect to one another, our place, and our rivers?
I used to laugh when the kids were growing up because we never went on vacation. Our idea of vacation was going for a fun family Sunday up Trail Creek, which is where we have our cows in the mountains. And invariably, it would turn into work. I mean, certainly there's the time spent, but there's a large emotional investment to the land. People love this place, and they are invested in making it a good place to live.
We grew up here in Montana, and before I could even walk And my entire life, we were always spending time on the rivers. Moving back to Livingston and literally living 5 minutes from the river is what really just confirmed how important they are in my well-being and feeling happy and fulfilled in my life.
I mean, I was born and raised in Livingston, and I had a father and a mother who very much liked to fish. We lived on trout, largely, and wild game. My passion is being outside, but it's never more fulfilling than when I'm able to share in the experience with my daughters. Just being on the Yellowstone last evening and the bird life that we saw and the impending storm, it just was really incredible, as it is every time. My name is Dale Sexton, and I'm the co-owner of Dan Bailey's. Dan Bailey's has a very rich history. Him and his wife moved here from New York and started this fishing business in 1938. He was involved in anything and everything that was conservation related with regard to the Yellowstone and also just with regard to the greater Yellowstone ecosystem.
I think Yellowstone is relatively a healthy river, but I don't think it's immune to threats that it has faced over decades. The biggest wake-up call was in 2016 with the whitefish kill. And that happened because of PKD, which is proliferative kidney disease.
PKD is caused by a parasite which can be brought from other waterways. Its impact can be exacerbated by increased water temperatures, which the Yellowstone River experienced in the month leading up to the fish kill. In August and September of 2016, PKD killed an estimated tens of thousands of mountain whitefish, causing Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks to close 183 miles of the Yellowstone River to all recreational activities for several weeks. These closures resulted in a total estimated economic loss of $500,000 for local businesses from Gardner down to Laurel, Montana.
The response to that was pretty divisive. It really pitted a lot of the fishing outfitting community against the landowners along the river.
A lot of people wanted to blame irrigation in the valley for less water in the river, which raised the temperatures.
When Fish, Wildlife, and Parks shut down the river, it essentially shut down the outfitters and guides' work. When they looked alongside the river and they still saw pivots irrigating, that's what created that animosity. And it was one of the things that made us realize we can't manage what we're not measuring. We had no idea how many whitefish were in this river. We didn't have proper monitoring to understand what water temperature was and water quality issues. And we brought together landowners, we had technical experts, we had just the interested public to come together so that we could talk about what threats the river has and what we can do better to protect it into the future for better resiliency. And that was really what catalyzed the effort of the Upper Yellowstone Watershed Group today.
We're getting that put together. We're looking at a meeting very end of November or very first part of December.
The Upper Yellowstone Watershed Group is a collaboration among those who live, work, and are connected to the elements of this watershed. Membership includes ranchers, fishing and other recreational business owners, government agency, conservation organizations, and interested residents. The group focuses on the stretch of the Upper Yellowstone watershed from the north boundary of Yellowstone National Park and the community of Gardner downstream to Carter's Bridge, just south of Livingston.
I think we're adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming.
As a watershed group, their collaborative efforts touch on a variety of elements, from mountaintop to river bottom and everything in between in the valley, looking at locally guided ways to improve both landscape and socioeconomic health. And in this valley, those things intersect at every level. The group not only creates a collective space to exchange ideas and discuss responses, but it facilitates projects, leads community education and outreach, and coordinates the collection and dissemination of scientifically sound monitoring and assessment data. Some current watershed group projects include a recreational use study, efforts to reduce wildlife conflict, flood and drought resiliency planning, and the Give Back to the Yellowstone campaign to garner funding to support these projects. The group consists of subcommittees, which focus on areas such as agriculture or recreation, but the group comes together in its entirety at quarterly meetings, which are open to the public. Both Wendy and Druska are members of the Upper Yellowstone Watershed Group. Wendy serves as an advisor, and Druska is the former chairperson.
The Upper Yellowstone Watershed Group has been around for a long time. In the beginning, a bunch of ranchers would come to these meetings, and whatever speakers and information was shared was always ag-oriented. Then the fish kill happened in 2016, so we made an effort to kind of recreate the Watershed Group, and that came to include more tourism, angling, businesses that need the valley, more wildlife interests that need the valley, environmental groups. It became obvious that it was going to be a more diverse group than what the ranching community was used to. And bottom line, the ranching community didn't like that.
I think there's a number of dynamics and issues that make working together challenging in the valley. I think there's a perception from ranchers that they're going to be told from outside groups on how they're supposed to manage their operations and their land. There's also a history of water conflicts that have been taken to the stage of litigation. The trust issues also extend to the other side. There's assumptions being made on whether it's fertilizer application or land management practices that they assume are degrading the river in such a way that aren't actually true.
In recent years, the Watershed Group consulted with a state hydrologist whose studies found that most of the water that's diverted in the spring from the rivers and creeks into irrigation ditches and canals actually seeps through the soil and recharges the groundwater, where some of it makes its way back to the Yellowstone River through underground drainage. This recharge water brings much-needed cooling to the river in late summer months, which benefits fish populations and overall river health. Of course, this and every other element of the watershed is very complex, but this shows just one example of how discussion and data can clarify assumptions.
We created a committee of the Watershed Group called Paradise Valley Working Lands Group. And then we got the ranchers back into the room, and that committee reports those efforts back to the Upper Yellowstone Group. So it's been an effort to remain diversified, but at the same time, make sure that there was a place for everyone to have a say. And it's still hard for some ranchers to sit in the room with all those environmental groups. But there's dialogue, and before, there wasn't dialogue.
One of the first things that we did when we were rebuilding this watershed group was to come together and talk about what our common goals and our common values were. We've used that as a guiding compass in many ways. The more we can embrace being able to have conversation about something that might be deemed very controversial is going to be how we start to build relationships and work through some of these contentious issues in the watershed.
In 2022, after a low snowpack winter, the greater Yellowstone ecosystem experienced late spring snowfall. Then, in early June, there was a sudden hit of abnormally high temperatures, which caused rapid snowmelt from the mountains. This combined with intense rainfall and the region receiving the equivalent to 2 to 3 months' worth of summer precipitation in just 3 days. On June 13th of 2022, the Yellowstone River, which was already running high, nearly doubled its volume in a 24-hour period.
When I woke up that morning and started to see what was happening at the Corwin Springs gauge, we knew it was going to be unlike anything that we've ever experienced. Once it became evident that we were going to see almost a double peak flow than the river had ever experienced in the last 100 years, it started to get scary.
We had to do something. We didn't know what to do, so we went down to G Street Park and sandbagged until they ran out of sand and in bags, and all of our backs were sore. And
one of the beautiful things about that day is seeing Park County Environmental Council really show up and coordinate volunteers in a way that our local government really couldn't do. And because of them immediately taking action, getting people to come out and fill sandbags and trying to get them out to the community, I would credit them with saving the town from that levee busting out and flooding the east side of Livingston.
The morning of the flood, it had been raining pretty steady for a couple, 3 days, which we thought was great because the land needs a lot of water. But got up around 5:30 that morning, and my husband started worrying. We had about 30 animals down here on the river bottom. It took 4 of us to get those cattle into a safer pasture, and it continued to rain and it continued to rise. If you look at those willows that are out farther there, that's actually where our bank used to be. From here to the fence line was all grass that the cattle could eat during calving time. You can see how much land we've lost all through here. It's deposited all of this silt, and when the wind blows now, it's just like the Dust Bowl. This is the kind of dust that poses a real health hazard for the cows and calves in terms of pneumonia. So it's going to be bad, and we'll just have to adapt, which is what ranchers do every single day, is adapt to changing conditions. And our conditions have certainly changed. The tourist industry took a huge hit, and the ag land is gone. But if you don't live here, you don't care. And I don't mean that in such a negative sense on people, because everybody's got so much to deal with in their lives. But it became clear to me how much time has happened after a disaster. It's really easy not to have an understanding of what those impacts are long term.
The Yellowstone River and its tributaries throughout central and eastern Montana experienced record-breaking and devastating flooding. For Paradise Valley, in addition to homes lost and infrastructure damaged, the economic drivers in this valley, agriculture and recreational tourism, took a huge hit. This valley is a gateway to Yellowstone National Park, and closures to the park's north entrance in Gardner resulted in a massive hit to the region's local businesses. During the summer season, which is when these businesses make the bulk of their revenue for the entire year. At the Kinkeys Ranch, not only were the calving grounds impacted by the flooding, but infrastructure was destroyed, including a stackyard building and fencing that keeps cattle away from the river. Druska estimates that between the necessary riverbank restoration and the infrastructure replacement, repairs could cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars.
The agencies that come to assist with their programs, there's not a lot of them that help ag land. The one agency that did come, they told my husband, we have money to help you replace the stackyard, but you have to put it in the same spot. And why would you do that? To me, that is just the best illustration of how poorly government understands. And there's so many hoops to jump through. And at the end of the day, you're so exhausted just trying to survive, trying to navigate these programs. It's a little overwhelming.
One of the other great benefits of the Upper Yellowstone Watershed Group is the way we came together and rallied right after the flood. One of the things that we did is trying to coordinate all the agencies so that they were at least working together in some form or fashion.
Montana Freshwater Partners and others from the Upper Yellowstone Watershed Group were able to gather more than 20 people representing different agencies and entities to come together at a local rancher's property so they could coordinate and connect with one another and see the flood impacts firsthand.
It was amazing to see us come together and talking about how can we help the landowners navigate the chaos of funding and agency permitting regulatory requirements post-flood in a way that can actually help them and get them the resources that they need, while we also balance trying to look at alternative type of strategies we use to rebuild.
I don't think it was a silver bullet to provide all the resources that landowners needed, but I do think it set the groundwork for future collaboration and resources that might come to them more efficiently if and when the next flood or other emergency happens.
As Wendy mentioned, the agencies also discussed alternative strategies to slow erosion and to improve future flood resiliency. These alternative strategies can include soft armoring of the riverbank, where willows, root balls, and natural elements are utilized. Immediately following the 2022 flooding, the watershed group formed a subcommittee, the Upper Yellowstone River Assessment Committee, which consists of local landowners, agencies, and organizations. The group engaged in discussion around how to implement flood recovery efforts in a balanced and coordinated fashion. One of the conclusions was understanding the importance of leaving the natural woody debris in the floodplain to create benefits such as erosion control, habitat, and the slowing of future floodwaters. This subcommittee continues to meet at least once a month to coordinate and provide updates on recovery funding, technical support, and planning for future resiliency.
It was really hard to see houses going into the river. We're having to get swiftwater rescued out of their places because it came up so fast. So seeing that happen was really hard and emotional. And then also see just what in my mind was a beautiful event for the river, and just seeing that power and that force come down.
Some of those big old trees, the power of that river grabbing that log and relocating it. You're just watching a most wonderful purging and recycling of life. These sort of things we have no control of, and that's a good thing.
When rivers flood, it's a very important function for river health. It moves sediment that may have been there for long periods of time. It creates new channels. The deposition on sandbars help recruit new cottonwood forests and other plant species that are important for river health. So it essentially creates new life.
The Yellowstone River is not unlike other rivers of the world, where the past century has seen human attempts to control their path and flow to protect our built infrastructure, including railroads, highways, towns, and homes. This controlling can entail straightening the river into a channel, adding large rock or riprap, or hardening the riverbanks in other ways.
When rivers are hardened and controlled, it essentially strips them of that natural function. And that's when you see fisheries collapse, you see bug communities, wildlife collapse, issues of temperature, you see issues of water quality. Some other alterations include blocking side channels. These side channels in floodplains are necessary during times of flooding to absorb the water, slow it down. And when we block those side channels off, it shoots that intensity and that power in the main channel, and that's where we see even worse erosion and flooding impacts.
In any watershed, flooding impacts can also be decreased by elements that improve the ground's ability to absorb runoff. These elements include healthy forests and grasslands, biodiverse soils, and having unpaved ground surfaces upland from the river. Also, unchanneled waterways, which are able to naturally meander, allow water to slow down and seep deeper into the ground to replenish aquifers. These elements not only decrease impacts from floods, but they improve water retention during drought. climate studies of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, released in 2021, showed evidence that this pattern of long periods of drought, peppered with factors that lead to flash flood events, would become more prevalent going forward.
So many of these catastrophic events are becoming normalized. For us in March to be sitting here like, wow, this could be the driest summer on record, to 2 months later, like, woohoo, we've gotten all this moisture, this is terrific. To then, one of the most extreme nature events that we've ever experienced. And then now all of a sudden, the last 6 weeks have been some of our hottest and driest on record. It's not normal.
The Earth is telling us something, and we're not designed to listen to it anymore. What we need to do is start thinking about how to actually get involved with the pulse of the river. How do we teach not to build a house down in a floodplain? We don't take away places that absorb the shock of a flood. How does the river teach us? We're not the center of the universe. And that's one of our mistakes, is we think we are. That river's been there for quite a few years. It knows how to do what it does. And when it wants to change, it will change. Now, what other animal does that? And that's the human being. You know, the river is probably how we chose to live in a lot of ways. It gave us design. Don't think of the Yellowstone as like the veins in your body. Look at the human being designed after the river.
Hundreds of years ago, when we were building communities, we didn't really understand the importance of maintaining that space to these river systems and how important it was for them to move. That is actually one of the reasons that I left the engineering world. I had this realization that we were trying to engineer our way out of challenges that we were creating from growing as communities.
Land development up to the banks of the river is a problem. When somebody elects to build a home within the riparian area or within a very close distance to that, it affects the ecology. It's like the death of 1,000 cuts. And all of these homes are on septic systems, and one or two is one thing, but several thousand, and then all of a sudden you have measurable impacts. And not to mention, the river bottoms are migration corridors. It's where wildlife goes to seek sanctuary. Where all of a sudden you've got development within that corridor, it affects that calming area that is so critical for wildlife.
Montana Freshwater Partners began working with both city and county government to ensure that decision makers have up-to-date planning tools, such as channel migration maps or floodplain mapping, to better inform plans and policies that not only benefit river health, but that are fiscally responsible for taxpayers and prioritize public safety.
The more that we can allow nature to do her thing, the more resilient and healthy our systems will be.
We need to teach a different way about how we look at water. You can talk water and you can talk environment. It doesn't mean you're connected. It just means you're talking. When you start seeing the river in your heart rather than your head, you'll start to actually understand how this works and how we work. We lost connection when the system said, that's the environment and we're the people and we're different. And the environment's outside the window. That's when we changed as a society.
We try to create an experience that's meaningful and that sometimes is transformational. Just to spend a day on the Yellowstone River and to have the thrill of, wow, there's a bald eagle that just flew within 30 feet of us, and now he's perched right up there. You know, we have a lot of times a pretty captive audience. To be able to share with them our sense of appreciation and respect that we have for the resource, to where perhaps they could take that home and understand how important it is for our resource here, but also this whole world is one large organism, right? It's important that we have these values across the globe.
Tourism and recreation drives the economy in Paradise Valley and Livingston. In the whole of Park County, which Paradise Valley is a part of, recreation spending totals about $500 million per year, and visitor spending creates about 3,300 jobs. Some agricultural producers in Paradise Valley even supplement their income by offering recreational services. In the last few decades, river recreation numbers have been increasing exponentially on the Yellowstone River, with a rapid spike in the last 5 years specifically.
Recreation has its effects. I'm not talking about just the vegetation and such. Just being there, you can displace wildlife. And just as a result of more people, you've got more trash, you've got more dust. I know that the homeowners have been at their wits' end, essentially, dealing with the sheer amount of traffic. It's a new reality, and we need to come to terms with it because it's affecting the experience, but more importantly, it's affecting the river. There's things that we can do better. How can we come up with creative solutions to spread out the traffic and make sure you're a good steward and just honor and respect?
I think what happened with COVID is it really just broke loose a number of variables
that amplified the pressures and the amount of people that were coming here.
Luckily, we were coordinated and working together before that happened so that when we started to see these recreational pressures, we could come together and talk about what do we need to do better to understand and manage those. You need to have the data to understand what those pressures are before you would ever be able to talk about having some type of management plan.
In 2021, the Upper Yellowstone Watershed Group began conducting a recreational use study, where they gathered data and information on numbers, types, and timing of recreation on this stretch of the Yellowstone River. They conducted counts in person and also utilized time-lapse cameras to more effectively gather data. These cameras were placed along the river on private property and solely used for gaining knowledge of number of people, time of use, type of vessel, and type of recreation. 2023 will be the final season of gathering data, after which the results will be presented back to the community for discussion and planning efforts.
We hope to have some sort of a community-driven, grassroots recreation plan developed. We are trying really hard to stay away from the mistakes that other valleys have made that have created deep chasms within the community of, landowners and recreators. We want to go about this really in a smart way and how to make it equitable for everyone.
So it's actually helping to build trust between both the ag producers and also the recreation and angling side of the watershed group.
We're helping bring attention to issues that the landowners are facing, like trespassing. They're seeing a lot of waste out there.
Under Montana's stream access law, the public has the right to access and move along rivers that run through private property up to an area of the riverbank called the ordinary high watermark. This imaginary line is typically distinguishable by a difference in sediment type. This law does not give the public permission to cross private property to reach the river, nor does it permit access to the floodplains adjacent to a river or stream. Significant changes caused by the Yellowstone River's flooding in 2022 have made it difficult to discern the location of the ordinary high watermark, leading to trespassing by recreators onto private property.
People are going down the river, they see places to stop, and this looks like a great one now, and so they stop and they play. Part of it is just this public that isn't relating to a disaster. And there's a disconnect between who's on the river and the landowner. and they aren't recognizing that it's an integral part of the river, being the landowner. Ranchers are stewards of the land that they occupy. So we do the best job we can with what we have. And it is not perfect. If you don't live and work on the land, you don't truly understand how difficult that is on a day-to-day basis. The drought is very difficult. I see weeds. And then when you are out there in the elements and help those baby calves survive, whether they're just born or whether they're sick, it takes such a toll. Now we have the flood, the emotional toll it takes, and your capacity to manage that. The toll is greater and the capacity is less. So it gets really, really hard to keep adapting. But if you don't adapt, you don't survive. And at the end of the day, that's what you're trying to do, is survive. So when I walk here at home, I try and think of the bluebirds and the sandhill cranes and rejoice in that. And when I come over here to the pond, I try and think about the fish that are in it because they wanted to come up the creek and be there. When I first came here, really the valley was nothing but ranches. All of them were family owned. You would trade help and everybody would go to everybody's brandings, and there were lots and lots of connections because of the families. And over time, those families have left for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's death. Sometimes it's, I see the writing on the wall and there's too many people coming to Paradise Valley. Land prices are a little hard to turn down. So that has changed what the valley looks like. If the working lands do not stay vital in this valley, there will be development. It won't be wildlife like what we know now. No more open space. We're going to lose more of the connections in the ranching community that we've already lost.
In addition to the impacts on the health of the landscape, waters, and wildlife corridors, when the land is subdivided and fragmented, there's been a growing trend of people moving to this valley who do not occupy their home year-round. This is termed absentee landowners. If folks are not active members of their community, it is especially felt in rural areas, where each person contributes to things like volunteer fire departments, keeping school attendance numbers high enough to keep the doors open, or just being a known neighbor who can help when there's a need. It's these ripple effects that members of the watershed group are aware of and personally have a stake in, and therefore their locally guided efforts simultaneously work to benefit ecological health, community vitality, local businesses, and ranchers' ability to remain on the landscape.
My husband has been here all his life, born and raised right here. When Rich's family was originally here, they ranched, but they had card parties on the weekends, and they did polka dances and, all of these things at the Immigrant Hall that brought people together. And now we don't take time out of our workday to do the connecting work. I would like for people to just try, to reach out to somebody, to listen better to somebody, and not immediately discount an opinion that you haven't heard, and find that compassion within yourself to care about what somebody's going through. Because in their world, it's big, even if it isn't in yours. That's part of why I think we have still kind of separate groups in the watershed, is because it's vulnerable to be there and say what you feel or hear what somebody else feels. It's hard to have a voice. It's hard to commit the time to have a voice. But if you do not have a voice or a seat at the table, everything that happens will happen in spite of you.
To truly have meaningful and impactful work on the ground, funding has to be available to create space for people to come together, to build relationships.
I've been going to the Upper Yellowstone Watershed Group meetings since I started in my position. Sitting down with people who use the land differently from the way I use it is hugely important. It's creating a broader understanding of how we all live on the land here.
The Watershed Group has come a long way because we were kind of separate as far as it was always ag-oriented, and then they put together some of the recreation-oriented folks, and now we're together. And those solutions are a lot easier to come by with both sides working on them.
Trying to show that these two industries are working together, as well as the local community is working together in positive ways towards conservation efforts that really take into consideration everybody's perspective. Organized transparency, I would say, is the objective, with lots of space for people to share their opinions without turning into a free-for-all.
Your job here today is to speak your mind and give your opinion on these various projects. These projects we're talking about are things we do for fun here as locals, which is a different way to think about conservation than what we hear about in the media. We all recognize we have a recreational use issue that we're talking about. It would be nice to see if some of these projects could get that money allocated back to you folks who are local managers here. I think it would be good to have our legislators in the room too for these particular questions.
To your question about thresholds, that is one of the things that this group wants to tackle when you see the data. But I promise you one thing, one person's threshold is totally different than another person's threshold.
These questions, even around grizzly bear expansion, right, are going to require local, thoughtful, intelligent dialogue between people who live here.
I wish I could say that the Upper Yellowstone Watershed Group has solved all of our issues, and we have not, but we talk about it. And that transparency has allowed for the dialogue to continue always.
You could characterize us as a pretty dysfunctional family in a lot of ways. That said, we're still able to work together, and we're getting a lot of projects done, and we're able to coordinate and respond in a way that is making a difference in our watershed.
You see these people, you care about what's going on for them, they care about what's going on for you. I would have absolutely no reason to walk into the fly shop at Immigrant, because I don't fish. But through the Watershed Group, I have the connection to the people that run the fly shop, and I care about them. And I think that is, in the end, enriching the watershed, bringing new ideas, making new connections.
There's a lot of different entities working on lots of different issues in the valley, and I think where we can make the most headway is having more intentional focus on building our relationships and working together so that we're all supporting one another in those efforts.
You can take different people and you take them to your favorite pond and you let them look. And then you walk away and ask them, what did you see? And some people will say, oh, it was beautiful. There was a water lily over here. Or somebody will say, oh, I saw a frog over here. But you know, nobody sees all of it. That's the beauty of that river. We need everybody's input, leave out the drama, and then we can do something.
We're at a critical time for the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Unprecedented recreational use levels, demands for water escalating, climate change, too damn hot, lower flows all the time. Everything feels stressed. If there was ever a moment for us to really reground, it's right now. There's one Yellowstone River, and yeah, we're really fortunate.
I really believe the only way to implement things that are going to make it more resilient and healthy is from the grassroots, local, community-led effort. Even though that can be messy, we get frustrated, we ebb and flow in the amount of energy we have that we want to give towards that effort. We know that our love and connection to this place is so strong, and that's our strength, I think, as a watershed group and as a community.
That's where water law in the Montana in the West was totally screwed up. Is, you know, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting. That's a terrible attitude. Water's for getting along. And there's not a thing on this planet that the water doesn't love. It is the total expression, you know, and if it doesn't like it, it will change its state to include you. It's just wonderful.